They say, if people feel uncomfortable around you, maybe you should tone it down. We say, maybe they should tone down their inauthenticity. Welcome to another episode of Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where silence is sacred, aging is power, and small talk is a karmic punishment for pretending to care about the weather. In today's video, we explore 8 subtle, hilarious, and sometimes heartbreaking signs your aura is so powerful, it actually makes people nervous. You don't even have to speak. Just standing there in your cardigan, radiating unresolved truths like a scented candle of existential dread, is enough to send people scrambling for their phones. Each part unpacks the sign, why it quietly ruins dinner parties, a real-life story of how it shows up, and how to live with it without apologizing or explaining a damn thing. But don't miss part 8, where we uncover why your absence feels more real than most people's presence, and how that sacred echo becomes your spiritual legacy. It's not about ego, it's about embodied truth. So sit back, breathe like you mean it, and if this resonates, like and subscribe. Help us hit 1,000 subscribers so we can keep making content that supports your quiet, holy weirdness. Now let's begin, not with noise, but with the kind of presence that rearranges the room. Part 1. You're a mirror, and people hate mirrors, unless they're flattering. Let's be honest, most people say they want honesty, but what they really want is a compliment in disguise wearing a yoga hoodie. You walk into a room, smile politely, and suddenly someone gets defensive, like you just asked them about their browser history or unpaid karma. You didn't say anything. You didn't even sigh. But your presence? Oh, your presence screamed, "I see you." Not the social mask. Not the polite laugh, not the recycled small talk. You saw the real stuff. The anxiety twitch under their left eye, the silent marriage regrets hiding behind their Instagram couple photos, the uncried tears from 1984. You are a mirror, and not one of those flattering department store mirrors that make everyone look like a filtered Instagram influencer in soft lighting. No, you're more like a bathroom mirror at 7 a.m., with bad lighting and full spiritual clarity. And people hate that, because deep down, most folks would rather feel comfortable than awake. But here's where it gets interesting. You're not trying to expose anything. You've just lived long enough and real enough that your energy doesn't lie anymore. Buddhist monks would say your energy has dropped its masks. You've shed enough illusion that you now live with a kind of transparent gravity. You don't push, you just are, and somehow that unsettles people more than shouting ever could. It's funny, isn't it? You spend your 30s trying to be liked, your 40s trying to be respected, and your 60s trying to find your reading glasses. But by the time you reach your 70s or 80s, you're finally real. And ironically, that's when people start saying you're too much, too intense, too blunt, too quiet, too seen. You could be sitting silently at a family dinner, and someone will accuse you of judging them, when all you did was reach for the mashed potatoes with Buddhist detachment. But make no mistake, what they're reacting to isn't you. It's what your presence activates in them. You're not a problem. You're a spiritual MRI scan they didn't consent to. That's the beautiful curse of being awake in a sleepy world. You shine a light, not with words, not with effort, but just by having done your own inner laundry. You've faced your regrets, you've made peace with losses that still bring tears to your throat, you've sat in silence long enough to stop fearing it. And that quiet clarity? It's radioactive to people who are still trying to impress strangers on the internet. But here's your Buddhist koan for the day. It is not your responsibility to soften your truth, so others can stay comfortable in their illusion. You're not here to make people feel good, you're here to make people feel. And sometimes, feeling is the last thing they want. So yes, your aura might disturb the room, but that's not violence. That's medicine. The kind that tastes awful and cures what polite conversation never could. Will it be misunderstood? Absolutely. Will you sometimes be called cold for choosing silence over performative sympathy? Definitely. But here's the truth. You're not judging them. They're just looking into the part of themselves they've avoided for decades, and your stillness gives them no place to hide. So don't dull your mirror. Don't paint flowers over your reflection. The world doesn't need more flattery. It needs more elders who reflect what's real, so we can finally remember who we are underneath all that pretending. Part 2. Your presence walks into the room before you do, and it doesn't ask for permission. You ever show up to a gathering and feel like the air changed before you even said hello? You didn't knock over a lamp. You didn't wear a neon outfit or yell across the hallway. You just entered. And the energy in the room did a little hiccup, like the universe cleared its throat. That, my friend, is what happens when your presence has stopped apologizing for existing. It's not magic. It's not ego. It's alignment. In Buddhist terms, your inner and outer life finally had tea together and agreed not to lie anymore. And now, without effort, your being radiates something that feels heavy, light, electric, and awkward, all at once. You know how in cartoons the scent of a pie travels across the room before anyone sees it? That's your aura now. Except instead of cinnamon, it smells like boundaries, wisdom, and the type of silence that makes people reevaluate their marriages. And some folks just can't handle that. See, in your younger years, you probably worked hard to be appropriate. You tried to soften yourself so no one felt threatened. You watered down your opinions, smiled at jokes that weren't funny, nodded at advice you didn't need. But now you enter a room like a slow-moving storm cloud wrapped in incense. Peaceful, but clearly not here to play small. It's not that you want attention. It's that you no longer bother dimming your light to avoid it. And that's exactly what disturbs people. Because when someone fully owns their being, when their breath, their spine, and their silence are all telling the truth at the same time, the average nervous system panics a little. Some will look away. Some will posture louder, as if to compete. Some will cling to their phone like it's a flotation device in a sea of your calm. They're not reacting to you. They're reacting to the stillness you carry. A stillness that dares to not need anything from them. That's terrifying to the kind of ego that survives on approval. Buddhists call this the power of non-grasping. When you walk into a space without trying to impress, persuade, or perform, you show up like a mountain. Not loud, not flashy, but undeniably there. And here's the kicker. Your presence isn't neutral. It moves things around. Old shame gets itchy. Unspoken truths get louder. People sense your energy before your voice even says hello. You walk in, and the emotional furniture rearranges itself. Not because you're dramatic, but because you've become a tuning fork for reality, and anything out of tune starts to feel uncomfortable. And if you've ever felt like you don't fit in anymore, this might be why. You're not meant to blend in. You're meant to anchor. You're meant to sit in the center of chaos and somehow still radiate enough peace to make a bartender weep and a toddler fall asleep. But I get it. It's not always easy. You might hear things like, "You're intense. I don't know why, but you make me nervous. You're just different." And that last one? That's actually true. You are different. Because while others are still figuring out how to be liked, you've decided to be whole. You're no longer trying to explain your presence. You're letting your presence explain itself. And the ones who are ready will feel it. They'll exhale deeper. They'll sit up straighter. They might not say a word, but something in them will shift because something in you already has. So the next time you walk into a room and someone looks startled, smile gently, not out of apology, but out of reverence, because your energy got there before your body did, and it said, "Ready or not, here comes the truth." Part 3. Animals and babies like you. Grown-ups get nervous. You ever notice how animals and babies seem to gravitate toward you, like you're a warm patch of sunlight on a cold floor? A cat you've never met curls up on your lap. A toddler stares at you like you're the reincarnation of their great-grandfather. And meanwhile, a 42-year-old adult shifts uncomfortably, clears their throat twice, and mutters something about their to-do list. Let's break this down. Animals and babies aren't confused by your silence. They're comforted by it. They're not judging your wrinkles, your stillness, or the fact that you sat through an entire social gathering without once checking your phone. They feel you. Why? Because they're not looking at your personality. They're listening to your energy. And your energy, my friend, has stopped pretending. Animals don't care what kind of car you drive or whether you're networking properly at this reunion. They care whether your energy is coherent. Is it clean? Grounded? Do you smell like truth? If yes, they'll come closer. If not, they'll growl, squirm, or run. That's the beauty of instinct. It doesn't lie, and neither do babies. Before language corrupts them and the world teaches them to be polite, babies are tiny spiritual antennae wrapped in chubby skin. They don't care about your smile. They care about what's behind your eyes. If you've made peace with your shadow, they'll see it. If you've softened your heart but kept your boundaries, they'll trust you. If you're performing, pretending, or pushing, they'll scream loudly in public, and they won't explain themselves. That's because your aura, when it's aligned, feels like home to pure beings, to animals, to children, and often to the inner child that most adults have locked in a metaphorical basement since their late teens. But here's where it gets funny. While the cat is curled on your lap and the baby is dozing off in your arms, the grown-ups in the room start to sweat. You haven't said anything, you haven't done anything, but they can feel the same thing the dog does. They just don't want to admit it, because adult minds, they've got filters, egos, insecurity, debt, and a long history of ignoring the truth in favor of looking normal. So when they sense you're vibrating on a different frequency, it makes them uneasy. Not because you're wrong, but because your calm reminds them of their own storm. And nobody wants to admit the barking dog is onto something when they've spent decades ignoring their own inner howling. Let's put it this way. Animals and babies see with their bodies. They speak the language of energy. They recognize the quiet strength that no resume or social media profile can fake. Adults? They usually need 3 therapy sessions, 1 midlife crisis, and a mushroom trip to even begin to understand what a dog knows in 5 seconds. That's why it's not uncommon for you to feel more at home in the garden with your cat than at brunch with Karen from the HOA. And that's okay. Buddhism teaches us that presence speaks louder than words. That truth doesn't need to explain itself, and that who you are is felt far more deeply than what you say. So the next time a baby reaches out for you while their mother looks confused, or a dog lies at your feet while its owner avoids your gaze, take it as the compliment it is. Because somewhere deep in their bones, the pure ones recognize something sacred in you, a stillness that doesn't flinch, a presence that doesn't push, and a heart that doesn't need attention to keep loving. Part 4. You can read a room like a Buddhist FBI agent, and people hate that you walk into a room and immediately feel it, the tension, the weird vibe, the secret resentment hovering just behind someone's perfectly polished, "I'm fine." You don't know what happened yet, but you know something happened. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, someone accidentally says the word divorce over the salad, and everyone drops their forks in slow motion. You already knew. You didn't snoop. You didn't eavesdrop. You just felt it. Because when your energy is aligned, your intuition doesn't knock. It walks in barefoot and sits down like it lives there. Buddhist practice calls this clear seeing, that moment when the veil drops and you no longer need words or proof. You simply know. It's not mystical. It's not spooky. It's just what happens when the noise inside you gets quiet enough to hear everything else. You've stopped overriding your gut in favor of being polite. And now your gut is fluent in spiritual languages most people pretend don't exist. Here's how it shows up. You feel a headache before someone says they're stressed. You know a marriage is dying before anyone takes off the ring. You know someone is lying even when their words are smiling. And worst of all, they know you know. They don't know how you know, but something about your gaze makes them shuffle their feet and forget what they were saying. You're not judging. You're not gossiping. You're just standing there like a retired Buddhist detective who solved this case 100 times. And that makes people deeply uncomfortable. Because the modern world is full of masks. Social masks. Professional masks. Trauma masks wrapped in self-help slogans. And when someone like you walks in with no mask, it throws everything out of balance. It's like showing up to a masquerade ball with your whole face exposed. Everyone else starts sweating behind their feathers. You don't have to call anything out. Your being does the heavy lifting. You just sip your tea while the vibe adjusts itself around your presence. It's not always easy, though. Sometimes you wish you couldn't feel everything. Sometimes you wish you didn't walk into your niece's baby shower and instantly sense that her husband is texting someone named Crystal behind her back. But here we are. You've become an antenna, a soft-spoken, overly perceptive antenna that picks up subtle lies and buried grief with the accuracy of a Buddhist monk who used to work in counterintelligence. And that's not something you turn off. It's something you learn to carry with compassion, not control. You don't need to announce what you know. You just hold the knowing like a warm stone in your pocket. And when you speak, if you choose to, people listen differently because they can tell this isn't guesswork. This is coming from a place that doesn't need to prove anything. It just knows. So if people accuse you of being too intense, if they say you look like you're always reading people, if they suddenly get fidgety and switch the subject whenever you make eye contact, smile gently, let it be. You're not a threat, you're just a walking truth detector. And yes, some people would rather sit on a cactus than be seen that clearly. Part 5. Small talk makes you feel like you're dying, and not in the enlightened way. There you are, trapped in a conversation about traffic. Again, someone's explaining for the third time how they got stuck on the freeway for 27 minutes behind a truck carrying cantaloupes. You smile, you nod, but inside, your soul is gently rolling its eyes and whispering, "So this is how I go." Small talk. Not war, not disease, just relentless, soul-thinning small talk. And it's not that you're snobby. You don't think you're better than anyone. You've just reached a point where words that don't carry meaning feel like spiritual sandpaper. You've walked through grief. You've sat with dying friends. You've stared at ceilings and asked questions the universe still hasn't answered. So when someone asks, "How about this weather?" Huh? It takes everything in you not to say, "Oh yes, the weather," just like the weather on the day my first illusion died. Buddhism teaches the value of right speech, words that are true, timely, and necessary. And yet, the world keeps handing you verbal spam, sound without substance, talk without touch. You feel it in your body. Your chest contracts, your energy retreats, your mind floats to more meaningful places, like death, rebirth, or what you're having for dinner. And here's the kicker. Most people don't notice, because most people don't live in their bodies anymore. They live in their social roles, their scripts, their verbal scaffolding. You, on the other hand, have retired from performance. You don't need to fill space just to feel valuable. You've learned that silence isn't awkward, it's honest. But this new clarity comes with a side effect. You don't want to talk unless it matters. And the world is full of people terrified of talking about what matters. You'd rather sit quietly with someone in grief than chat about their air fryer. You'd rather stare at a tree than fake laugh through a joke about aging knees. Although, fair enough, those knees do make a lot of noise now. And this makes people uncomfortable. Because your energy is asking without saying a word, can we be real? And realness requires presence. Presence requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires someone to step out of the shallow end. You're not asking for a TED Talk every time someone opens their mouth. You're just allergic to pretending. And pretending is what most small talk is made of. So what happens? You leave gatherings early. You find comfort in animals, gardens, books, and long walks. You discover that solitude with sincerity feels less lonely than company with masks. It's not depression, it's discernment. You've stopped trading your sacred attention for empty conversation. You've stopped handing out your listening like coupons. And while that might leave you with fewer friends, it leaves you with better silence. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. The kind that feels like home. So the next time someone at a party corners you with, "So, how about them sports teams?" Smile. Breathe. Maybe say, I once watched the sunrise and realized time is an illusion. And then excuse yourself to go sit by the dog. Part 6. You don't go silent. You weaponize silence like a Zen assassin. You know that moment when someone says something ridiculous and instead of responding, you just blink slowly and say nothing? Yeah, that wasn't awkward. That was spiritual artillery. See, most people think silence is the absence of noise. But you know better. Your silence is not passive. It's pressurized stillness. It's loaded with years of watching, noticing, unlearning, forgiving, meditating, not slapping people, and choosing peace instead. And now, your silence enters a room like a monk who just took a vow of "don't mess with me." You don't interrupt, you don't fight for airtime. You don't explain yourself unless the moment is worth the words. And that makes people squirm. Because we live in a world addicted to noise. A world where people talk just to hear themselves echo. Where silence is treated like a malfunction instead of a sacred space. But silence, in the Buddhist tradition, is one of the greatest teachers. Noble silence, they call it. Not just the absence of chatter, but the full presence of being. And that's what you've mastered, probably without even trying. You've learned that when you say nothing, everything inside other people starts speaking. They fill in the blanks with insecurity. They project meaning onto your stillness. They start confessing things you never asked about just to fill the void you so peacefully created. And let's be clear, you're not trying to intimidate anyone. You're just tired of wasting words on things that don't matter. You've used your words to comfort, to teach, to beg for understanding that never came, to tell your truth and have it ignored. Now, you've graduated. Now you let your presence do the heavy lifting. You've become a kind of lighthouse. Still, solid, unapologetically quiet, yet fully visible. And while some will be drawn to that light, others will complain it's too bright and accuse you of being distant. Let them. You don't need to explain your silence to people who use volume to disguise emptiness. Sometimes your quiet is the most loving response. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's mercy. And yes, sometimes it's just you thinking about lunch. But whatever it is, your silence has become a kind of aura amplifier. It carries weight. It carries clarity. And it speaks fluently in the language of a four. I'm not here to entertain you. You're not cold. You're composed. You're not rude. You're discerning. You're not quiet because you don't have anything to say. You're quiet because most things don't need to be said. And this is what scares people the most. You're not performing. You're being. And in a world full of performers, pure being is deeply unsettling. So if you ever find yourself in a conversation where someone says, "Wow, you're really quiet," look them in the eye, smile softly, and reply, "That's because I stopped talking to prove I exist." Then go back to your tea, or your knitting, or your garden, or your gentle, wordless revolution. Part 7. People confess weird stuff to you in the produce aisle. You were just trying to buy carrots. Organic, overpriced, morally upright carrots. But now you're standing there, holding a limp bundle of kale, while someone you barely know tells you they've never forgiven their father. You don't flinch, you don't interrupt, you just listen. Because this isn't new for you. You've become a confessional booth with walking shoes. A safe zone disguised as an aging human with really kind eyes and a shopping list. People don't even mean to do it, it just spills out. Like their soul's been looking for a pressure valve and somehow you became the designated release point. Hey, how are you? Oh, you know, I'm still recovering from the affair I never told anyone about. So, zucchini's on sale? Buddhism teaches that when we embody presence, true, grounded, unshakable presence, we become a field. A space where truth can arise without force. And guess what? You've become that field. Your aura? It's no longer trying to control the conversation. It just holds space. It says you're safe to take off the mask here. And most people don't even realize they've done it until it's already out. Their pain, their regrets, their confusion, spoken aloud for the first time in years next to the eggplant display. It's not because you cry. It's because you don't flinch. You're not afraid of pain anymore. You've buried parents, held hands in hospice, sat through grief without trying to fix it. You know the language of sorrow, and that makes you rare. People can feel that. It's why strangers tell you things they haven't told their therapist, why neighbors get teary-eyed around you and don't know why friends always say, I don't know what it is about you, but I feel better when you're around. What they're feeling is your non-reactive presence. You're not rushing to solve. You're not performing empathy. You're just there. And that, my dear, is medicine. But let's be honest, it's also a little exhausting sometimes. You didn't sign up to be the community's emotional compost bin. You were just trying to get your errands done without collecting 5 new trauma stories and 1 spiritual awakening. And yet here you are, holding space while someone breaks down in aisle 6, trying to be gracious while also wondering if you remembered to buy dish soap. This is the paradox of your presence. You radiate calm, so people bring you chaos. And you accept it, not because you have to, but because you've learned how to sit with discomfort without making it about you. That's what Buddhists call compassion without attachment. You're not trying to be anyone's savior. You just know how to hold a heavy story gently. And in a world that's constantly yelling, scrolling, and pretending, that's more healing than any advice ever could be. So when someone stops you mid-avocado and starts talking about their inner child or their estranged son or how they cried in the car this morning, just nod. Offer them the kind of silence that doesn't rush in to fix. Offer them the kind of listening that feels like being witnessed, not evaluated. And when it's over, when they say, sorry, I don't know why I told you all that, just smile and say, because I'm not afraid of what's real. Then gently steer your cart toward the frozen peas, like the spiritual ninja you are. Part 8. Your absence feels more present than most people's existence. You left the room 15 minutes ago, but the air still hasn't settled. Someone keeps glancing at the chair you were in. Another person fumbles through their phone, suddenly unsure what they were doing before you showed up. And there's this weight, not heavy like grief, heavy like presence that's still echoing. That's you. You're gone, but somehow not really. Because your energy doesn't just show up, it imprints. Buddhism would call this karma, the subtle trail your actions, your thoughts, your being leaves in the field around you. Not in a judgmental, you'll pay for that kind of way, but in the U-shaped impression you leave behind wherever you walk. You don't just enter rooms now, you haunt them. In the most sacred way. You've become what elders used to be before the world forgot how to listen. A living ritual. Someone who walks slowly, speaks rarely, and somehow leaves others with questions they didn't even know they needed to ask. You're not trying to be profound. You're just done performing. And that has its consequences. Because while others chase attention, you chase alignment. While others leave behind likes, you leave behind reverberations. Ever had someone say to you, "I've been thinking about what you said last week," except you don't remember saying anything? That's because it wasn't the words, it was your being. You became a mirror, a doorway, a reminder. And reminders don't vanish when they walk out. They linger. You've probably noticed it yourself. Some people are still there, even years after they've died, and others forgettable before the front door closes behind them. So ask yourself honestly, am I the kind of presence that echoes? You already know the answer. You've lived through enough silence to recognize your own. You've walked away from people, places, and situations that didn't see your worth, and yet they still feel your absence in ways they don't have words for. Why? Because you stopped trying to be liked a long time ago and started practicing something far more terrifying to the status quo: authenticity. You became the person whose goodbyes are felt in the bones, whose absence is louder than another's applause. And sure, not everyone will admit it. You might never hear, "I miss your energy." You might only hear it in the space where people stumble through their sentences after you've gone. But that's okay. You didn't come here to be famous. You came here to be felt. And you are. Everywhere you've truly been, you still are. In the laugh that someone replays quietly when they miss your company. In the advice you gave that didn't make sense until 2 years later. In the silence you held for someone who didn't have the strength to fall apart alone. So don't worry if people don't always thank you. Your aura isn't a performance, it's a prayer in motion. You didn't just live, you left a trace, not a brand, not a logo, not a LinkedIn achievement, a frequency, a U-shaped ripple in the field of everything. And that's the kind of immortality no algorithm can measure. So when you walk out of a room, don't look back. The people who felt you will never forget. The people who didn't were never really there. So, you made it. Through the awkward silences, the barking dogs who loved you too much, the produce aisle confessions, and the unbearable agony of talking about traffic with people who are spiritually asleep. You've now seen what most people miss in themselves. Your presence. The real one, the one you stopped hiding after your 4th spiritual heartbreak. It speaks louder than your voice ever could. We talked about mirrors that make people flinch, silences that rearrange the air, and the strange gift of being a walking truth serum. And if even one of these signs rang true for you, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not too intense. You're just finally aligned, and the world hasn't adjusted its volume yet. Now, before you vanish into your own aura and go reorganize your bookshelf by spiritual trauma, tap that like button if something in this video whispered, "That's me." Leave us a comment, tell us which sign felt the most real. And subscribe if you haven't already, because your quiet support helps us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep making this kind of medicine for the soul. Until next time, may your energy remain disturbing in the most healing way possible. And remember, you're not here to fit in, you're here to wake people up. Peace, weirdos. See you in the next one.